Without me, she'd be homeless. My mother's voice carried across the courtroom before I even looked up from the table. The room went quiet, not completely silent. You could still hear the air conditioning humming somewhere overhead, and the faint squeak of someone's chair, but quiet enough that every person in that courtroom heard exactly what she said. I felt my stomach tighten. The judge looked over his glasses toward me. Then he glanced back at my mother. She sat straight-backed in a navy blazer she'd probably bought at Macy's years ago. Her silver hair was perfectly styled. Her pearl earrings matched the necklace she always wore to church. If you saw her sitting there, you'd think she was the sweetest woman in Montgomery County. Most people did. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 47 years old that day, sitting in a courthouse in Dayton, Ohio, while my own mother tried to have me legally removed from a house she claimed was hers. And somehow I was the one being treated like a burden. The hearing started at 9 a.m. I'd arrived early. Old habit. When you've spent 20 years working as a school secretary, showing up late feels almost criminal. I parked my aging Toyota Camry in the county garage across from the courthouse and walked 3 blocks through downtown Dayton carrying a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. At least that's what it felt like. I hadn't slept much the night before. I'd spent half the night staring at my bedroom ceiling and the other half drinking coffee at my kitchen table while the local news played quietly in the background. Part of me still couldn't believe we'd ended up here. Not after everything. Especially not after everything. Across the aisle, my younger brother Steve sat beside Mom. Steve was 44. He wore a sport coat that looked 2 sizes too small and kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. When our eyes met, he gave me a little smirk. The same smirk he'd had since we were kids. The one that said he already thought he'd won. I looked away. The judge began reviewing the case file. Mom's attorney stood and started speaking. Your Honor, my client has provided housing assistance to her daughter for years. Mrs. Morgan has repeatedly attempted to help her daughter become financially independent. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. The attorney continued. Unfortunately, Ms. Morgan has remained dependent upon family support and now refuses to vacate the property despite repeated requests. Dependent. That word landed harder than it should have. Because it wasn't just coming from a lawyer. It was coming from years of family conversations, years of whispers, years of assumptions. The disappointing daughter. The struggling daughter. The daughter who never quite measured up. The funny thing was, I actually had a decent life. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but decent. I worked at Lincoln Elementary School in Kettering for nearly 2 decades. I paid my bills. I survived a divorce. I took care of myself. I volunteered at the local library twice a month. I had friends. I had neighbors who knew my name. But none of that mattered to my mother. Because compared to Steve, I was always falling short. Steve owned a small landscaping business. Or at least that's what he told everyone. In reality, he spent most of his time talking about business rather than running one. Mom acted like he was a financial genius. Every family gathering became another opportunity for her to praise him. Steve's doing wonderful. Steve's expanding. Steve's thinking about retiring early? I couldn't remember the last time she introduced me without mentioning my divorce. The judge asked a few questions. Mom answered confidently, almost cheerfully. That hurt more than I expected. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She genuinely seemed to enjoy this, like she'd finally gotten proof that she'd been right about me all along. At one point, she turned slightly toward the gallery. Several relatives sat behind her. My cousin Denise, my Aunt Carol, 2 church friends, people I'd known most of my life. They nodded as she spoke. Not one of them looked at me. I focused on the legal pad in front of me. Just breathe. Just wait. My attorney had wanted me to speak earlier. I refused. Not yet. Not until I absolutely had to. Because the truth was sitting inside that folder. And once it came out, there would be no putting it back. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes. Then Mom's lawyer delivered the line that almost made me lose my composure. Mrs. Morgan has essentially carried her daughter financially. I stared at him. Carried me. The woman who hadn't paid my electric bill since I was 18. The woman who forgot my birthday twice after my divorce. The woman who hadn't visited me during my recovery after surgery. That woman had carried me. I gripped the edge of the table. My attorney leaned closer. You okay? I nodded. Barely. The problem wasn't anger. The problem was sadness. I kept remembering moments that had nothing to do with court. Thanksgiving dinners. Christmas mornings. Phone calls that ended with criticism disguised as concern. Years spent trying to earn approval that never came. And the worst part, A small piece of me still wanted it. Even then, even sitting in that courtroom, I still wanted my mother to look at me with pride. That realization stung. The judge eventually closed the file. He folded his hands together. "Mrs. Morgan, thank you." Mom smiled. The kind of smile people use after they think they've made their case. Then the judge turned toward me. "Ms. Morgan." I looked up. "Yes, Your Honor." He studied me for a moment. Not coldly, not warmly, just carefully. "Before I make any decisions today, is there anything you'd like to add?" The room felt smaller. I could hear someone shifting in the gallery. My attorney looked at me, waiting. Across the aisle, Steve rolled his eyes. Mom crossed her arms. Confident, certain. Then something unexpected happened. Mom's attorney frowned. He was staring at a document near the bottom of the file stack. A document I'd submitted weeks earlier. I watched his expression change. Confusion. Concern. Then something very close to panic. He looked at me, then at my attorney, then back down at the page. For the first time all morning, my mother stopped smiling. I realized the moment I'd been dreading for 5 years had finally arrived. The truth was about to enter the room, and nobody sitting on the other side was prepared for it. I stood up slowly. My knees felt stiff, though I couldn't tell whether it was from sitting too long or from what I was about to do. The courtroom waited. The judge looked at me. My mother looked annoyed. Steve looked bored. Neither one had any idea what was coming. "Your Honor," I said, "there's something my family doesn't know." The room became very still. The judge nodded. "Go ahead." I glanced toward my attorney. He gave me a small nod. We'd discussed this possibility for weeks, but even now part of me wanted to sit back down and keep quiet. That had always been my role in the family. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Let things go. Smile when you're hurt. Pretend everything is fine. I spent most of my life doing exactly that. Unfortunately, that's how people learn they can walk all over you. My mother shifted in her chair. "What is she talking about?" she asked her attorney. He didn't answer. He was still looking at the document. I took a deep breath. To explain what happened next, I need to go back 5 years. Back to 2019. Back to my grandfather, Walter Bennett. If there was one person in the world who ever made me feel truly seen, it was Grandpa Walter. He lived in Springfield, Ohio, about 45 minutes from Dayton. A quiet brick ranch house on a corner lot. Nothing fancy. A few maple trees. An old American flag by the porch. A garage packed with tools he'd collected over 60 years. The kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust no matter what season it was. By 2019, Grandpa was 88. His health was declining. Nothing dramatic at first. Just the normal things. Doctor appointments. Medication changes. A bad knee. A heart condition. The kind of problems that slowly take over a person's calendar. I started driving him to appointments every Thursday. At first it was temporary. Then it became routine. Every Thursday morning I'd leave work early. Pick him up. Drive to the clinic. Help him fill prescriptions afterward. Sometimes we'd stop at Bob Evans for lunch. He always ordered the same thing. Pot roast. Every single time. One afternoon he laughed and said, "At my age, if I find something that works, I stick with it." That was Grandpa. Simple, steady, reliable. The exact opposite of family drama, at least most of the time. Meanwhile, my mother rarely visited. She always had reasons: church committee meetings, volunteer events, travel plans, lunch with friends. There was always something. Steve showed up occasionally, usually when money came up. I don't say that to be cruel. It's simply the truth. One afternoon, I arrived at Grandpa's house and found Steve sitting at the kitchen table. That alone surprised me. He hadn't visited in nearly 3 months. As soon as I walked in, I heard him asking questions. Questions about properties, taxes, investments, insurance. Not questions about Grandpa's health. Not questions about how he was feeling. Just questions about assets. After Steve left, Grandpa shook his head. Then he looked at me. "You know what the funny thing is?" "What?" "He thinks I don't notice." I didn't respond, because I knew exactly what he meant. The months passed. Grandpa needed more help. I started grocery shopping for him, paying bills online, organizing medications, handling paperwork. Not because I expected anything, because he needed someone, and because he was family. In the summer of 2020, his health worsened significantly. I spent nearly every weekend in Springfield. Some weekends I slept on his couch. I learned how to check oxygen levels. I learned how to navigate insurance forms. I learned that caregiving is mostly made up of little things nobody sees. Laundry, phone calls, prescription pickups, cleaning out refrigerators, Waiting rooms. Hours and hours of waiting rooms. One evening, we sat on his porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the neighborhood. The rain was coming down hard. Grandpa looked unusually serious. Rachel. Yeah. I need to ask you something. Okay. If something happens to me, promise me you'll look after yourself. I laughed. That's an odd request. No, it isn't. He stared out at the rain. You spend so much time taking care of everyone else. At the time, I didn't think much of the conversation. I wish I had. Because a few months later, he called me into his study. The room smelled like old books and cedarwood. His attorney was there, a local lawyer named Harold Simmons. I assumed they needed witnesses for paperwork. Instead, Grandpa asked me to sit down. Then he handed me a cup of coffee, his favorite tactic whenever he needed to discuss something important. I remember feeling nervous immediately. Harold opened a folder. Grandpa folded his hands. Then he said something I never expected. I've updated my estate plan. I blinked. Okay, your mother isn't going to like it. That got my attention. I looked from Grandpa to Harold. Neither one was smiling. Then Harold slid a document across the desk. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. I thought there had to be a mistake. Grandpa, he raised his hand. No. I looked at him. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of the money. Not because of the properties. Because somebody had finally noticed. Somebody had seen everything. The appointments. The sacrifices. The weekends. The years. All of it. Grandpa reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. You earned my trust a long time ago. I couldn't speak. For several seconds, nobody in the room said anything. Then Harold explained the details. The estate included rental properties, commercial buildings, investment accounts, everything. I left that meeting in a complete fog. For months afterward, I considered telling my mother. I considered telling Steve. But every time I picked up the phone, I stopped. Partly out of fear, partly because I hoped it wouldn't matter. Maybe we'd still be a family. Maybe money wouldn't change anything. Maybe people would surprise me. I was wrong. Grandpa passed away 6 months later. The funeral was packed. Church friends, neighbors, former co-workers, family members. Everyone showed up. And afterward at the reception, I overheard something that still makes me laugh. Steve was standing near the dessert table talking to 2 cousins. He grinned and said, "Once Mom gets Grandpa's properties, things are finally gonna get easy." One cousin asked, "You think she'll share?" Steve laughed. "Of course she will." I stood 10 feet away holding a paper plate, listening, knowing, saying nothing. 5 years later, sitting in that courtroom, I finally looked directly at my mother. Then I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I said. The room seemed to lean forward. "I didn't inherit something from my grandfather." My mother frowned. Steve's smile disappeared. The judge waited. I finished the sentence. "I inherited everything." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock behind the judge's bench. Then my mother's attorney slowly lowered the document. And the color began draining from my mother's face. Nobody spoke for several seconds. My mother just stared at me. The expression on her face wasn't anger. Not yet. It was confusion. The kind of confusion people have when reality suddenly stops matching the story they've been telling themselves. Finally, Steve let out a short laugh. "That's ridiculous." Nobody joined him. Not even Mom. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Morgan, are you saying you inherited the entirety of Walter Bennett's estate?" "Yes, Your Honor." My attorney handed over copies of the documents. The judge began reviewing them carefully. Mom's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. The confidence he'd walked into court with that morning was completely gone. He adjusted his glasses and flipped through page after page. Then he closed the folder. Slowly, very slowly. My mother looked at him. Well, he didn't answer right away. That alone scared her. For as long as I could remember, people had always rushed to reassure my mother. Teachers, neighbors, family members, church friends, everyone. Watching someone hesitate around her felt strangely unfamiliar. "Margaret," he finally said. Her real name. Not Mrs. Morgan. Not Linda. Margaret. "I think we need a brief recess." She frowned. "Why?" He looked around the courtroom. "Because there are significant issues we need to discuss." The judge agreed. 10 minutes. Court recessed. The moment everyone stood up, the room exploded into whispers. My attorney and I moved toward a corner near the windows. Outside downtown Dayton looked completely normal. Cars moved through intersections. People carried coffee cups. Someone walked a dog down Main Street. The strange thing about life-changing moments is how ordinary everything else remains. Meanwhile, my family was unraveling. I watched Steve corner Mom's attorney. "What is this?" he demanded. "What does she mean she inherited everything?" The attorney rubbed his forehead. "Exactly what she said." "No." Steve laughed nervously. "No, that's impossible." The attorney didn't argue. He didn't need to. The documents were sitting right there. My mother walked toward me. Her face was pale now. Not dramatic movie pale. Just drained. Like someone had pulled the color out of her. "Rachel?" I turned. She lowered her voice. "What is this?" For a second, she almost sounded vulnerable. Almost. I could have answered 100 different ways. I could have been sarcastic, cruel, vindictive. Lord knows I'd imagined those conversations over the years. Instead, I said the truth. "It's Grandpa's will." Her eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Because after everything, she still thought that was the issue. Not what she'd done. Not why Grandpa made the decision. Not the years that led to it. Only why she hadn't been informed. I looked at her. Really looked at her. A 72-year-old woman standing in a courthouse hallway. Still convinced every story revolved around her. I tried to keep peace in the family. She shook her head. "No." Her voice grew sharper. "You hid this." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had. But not for the reasons she thought. Before I could answer, Steve stormed over. His face was turning red. "Tell me this is fake." I stared at him. Why would it be fake? Because Grandpa would have never done that. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so predictable. Even now, Steve couldn't imagine a world where consequences existed. A world where actions mattered. A world where people noticed who showed up and who didn't. Grandpa made his own decisions. Steve crossed his arms. "This is unbelievable." I wanted to say something cutting, something satisfying. Instead, I simply asked, "When was the last time you drove him to a doctor's appointment?" Steve didn't answer. "When was the last time you spent a weekend helping him?" Nothing. "When was the last time you visited him without asking about money?" His silence gave me all the answer I needed. The recess ended. Everyone returned to the courtroom. This time, the energy felt completely different. The confidence was gone. The assumptions were gone. Now people were paying attention. The judge reviewed additional documents. Property records, estate filings, tax records, everything. Then he looked up. "Ms. Morgan." "Yes, Your Honor." "According to these records, you inherited 4 residential rental properties." "Correct." He continued reading. 2 commercial buildings." "Yes." My mother stared at the papers. The judge turned another page, then his eyebrows rose slightly. That got everyone's attention. "What is it?" Steve asked. The judge ignored him. He studied the document again, then looked at me. "Ms. Morgan, according to county records, the residence currently occupied by Mrs. Morgan is also part of the inherited estate." A murmur spread through the room. My mother froze. The judge continued, "And has been for approximately 5 years." The silence afterward felt almost physical. My mother blinked twice, then 3 times. "No." She looked at me. "No." I didn't say anything. She stood halfway out of her chair. "No, that house is mine." The judge glanced back at the documents. "No, Mrs. Morgan, it appears ownership transferred after Walter Bennett's passing." The realization finally landed. The house. The house she'd been living in. The house she was using as the basis for this lawsuit. The house she claimed gave her authority over me. It wasn't hers. It hadn't been hers for years. Steve looked like he might faint. Then came the question nobody expected. The judge adjusted his glasses. "If that's the case, Ms. Morgan, why didn't you exercise ownership rights?" I knew what he meant. Why didn't I raise rent? Why didn't I sell it? Why didn't I force the issue years ago? The answer was simple. I looked at my mother, then back at the judge. Because she's my mother. The room went quiet again. Not shocked this time. Thoughtful. Even my attorney looked down for a moment. Because that was the part nobody understood. This wasn't some master revenge plan. I hadn't spent years plotting. I hadn't been waiting for the perfect opportunity. The truth was messier. Human. I loved my family. Even when they disappointed me. Even when they hurt me. For years I'd convinced myself things would improve. Maybe Mom would soften. Maybe Steve would mature. Maybe we'd eventually become the family I kept hoping for. Instead, I'd spent 5 years paying property taxes on a house I didn't live in. 5 years covering maintenance expenses. 5 years protecting people who never knew it. And somehow I'd still felt guilty. The judge nodded slowly. Then something unexpected happened. The court clerk, a woman probably in her 60s, looked up from her paperwork. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "Wait a second." Everyone turned. She immediately looked embarrassed. But it was too late. "What?" the judge asked. She pointed toward my mother. "She's suing the person who owns the house." A few people laughed. Even the judge struggled to hide a smile. The tension broke for a moment. Not completely, but enough. My mother wasn't laughing. Neither was Steve. The ground beneath them was disappearing. And for the first time all day they realized just how much they never knew. Then Mom's attorney slowly stood up. His face had gone gray. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor." The judge looked at him. The attorney swallowed. "There may be a matter regarding my continued representation in this case." My mother's head snapped toward him. "What does that mean?" The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the documents one last time, then at my mother. And in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Not mine. Hers. Because she finally understood. The story she'd spent years telling everyone was about to collapse. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The courtroom felt different when the hearing resumed. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Just heavier. Everyone knew something important had shifted. A few people from the gallery leaned forward in their seats. My cousin Denise wasn't looking at me the way she had earlier. The certainty was gone from her face. Even Aunt Carol looked uncomfortable. For years they'd heard one version of the story. The dependable mother. The struggling daughter. The woman carrying her family on her shoulders. Now cracks were appearing in that picture. And once people start seeing cracks, they begin looking closer. The judge adjusted the stack of documents in front of him. "Let's continue." Nobody spoke. My mother sat perfectly still. Steve looked like he hadn't blinked in 5 minutes. Mom's attorney remained standing. "Your Honor, before proceeding further, I need to address a serious concern." The judge nodded. "Go ahead." The attorney cleared his throat. "Based on the information recently confirmed, I was not aware of several material facts when this action was filed." My mother turned toward him. "What are you doing?" He ignored her. "I need the court to understand that my office was not provided with complete information regarding ownership of the property." The judge nodded. "Understood." My mother looked stunned. For perhaps the first time in her life, nobody was rushing to protect her. Nobody was stepping in front of consequences. Nobody was fixing the situation. The judge turned toward me. "Ms. Morgan, I'd like clarification regarding the property." "Of course." "How long have you been responsible for expenses associated with the residence occupied by Mrs. Morgan?" I opened the folder sitting beside me. My hands were steady now. Strangely steady. The fear I'd carried into court had disappeared. Not because I felt powerful. Because I was tired. Tired people eventually stop worrying about appearances. They start telling the truth. I handed documents to my attorney. He passed them forward. The judge reviewed them. Then his eyebrows rose. Again. He looked down at the paperwork. Then back at me. "These records indicate you paid property taxes." "Yes, sir." "Every year?" "Yes." The judge flipped another page. His expression changed. "What about these maintenance invoices?" I nodded. "I paid those too." My mother slowly turned toward me. The confusion on her face deepened. Almost as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. The judge continued. "Roof replacement, $11,000. "Correct." He turned another page. "Furnace installation." "Yes." Another page. "Plumbing repairs." "Yes." Another. "Foundation work." "Yes." The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear someone coughing in a hallway outside. Then the judge asked the question. "Mrs. Morgan, were you aware your daughter was paying these expenses?" Mom looked caught off guard. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Finally she answered. "No." The judge nodded. Then he asked something even simpler. "Did you ever ask?" The silence afterward lasted several seconds. Mom stared at the table. For once there was no speech prepared. No explanation. No excuse. No story. Just silence, and somehow that silence said more than anything else could have. Because the honest answer was obvious. Number. She never asked. Not about the taxes. Not about repairs. Not about where the money came from. Not about how things kept getting handled. The house simply worked. Problems disappeared. Bills got paid. And she assumed that was normal. I felt a strange sadness watching her. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Sadness. Because this was the moment I finally understood something. My mother never really knew me. Not the adult version. Not the woman sitting across from her. She knew the version she'd created years ago, the version that made sense to her, and she'd never bothered updating the story. The judge turned toward me again. Why continue paying these expenses? I smiled faintly. Not because it was funny. Because I honestly didn't know how else to answer. I thought it was the right thing to do. The judge studied me. You had no legal obligation to continue providing support. I know. And yet you did. Yes. Steve suddenly jumped in. This is ridiculous. The judge looked over. Excuse me. Steve stood up. His face was bright red now. Something isn't right here. The judge folded his hands. What specifically? Steve pointed toward me. She planned this. I almost laughed. Planned this. If he only knew. The sleepless nights, the years of hesitation, the countless times I'd considered just walking away. There had been nothing strategic about it. Just stubborn hope. The judge looked unimpressed. Mr. Morgan, do you have evidence supporting that claim? Steve hesitated. Well, no. Are you an attorney? The question caught him off guard. No. The judge nodded. Then I suggest you stop acting like one. Several people laughed. Even a couple folks in the gallery couldn't help themselves. Steve sat down immediately. His face somehow turned even redder. For the first time that morning, I actually felt a little lighter. Not because Steve was embarrassed, because reality had finally entered the conversation. Then the judge turned back to me. Ms. Morgan, is there anything you'd like to say before I rule? I hadn't planned on speaking. My attorney certainly hadn't planned on it. But after everything that had happened, I realized there was one thing I needed to say. Not for the judge. Not for the audience. For me. I stood. Slowly. The courtroom waited. I looked at my mother. For a second, I saw flashes of old memories. Elementary school concerts. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Good moments. There had been good moments. That made everything harder. Then I spoke. Mom? She looked up. I noticed her hands were trembling. Very slightly. But enough. I spent a long time trying to earn your approval. The room remained silent. I thought if I worked harder, helped more, stayed patient, eventually you'd see me differently. Her eyes dropped. I continued. But the truth is, you never wanted to know who I actually was. The words surprised even me. Not because they weren't true. Because I'd never said them aloud before. You preferred the version of me that made you feel superior. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Years of pain had condensed into one sentence. And once it was spoken, I couldn't take it back. My mother's eyes filled with tears, whether from guilt, anger, embarrassment, or some combination of all three, I couldn't tell. The judge waited a few moments before speaking. Then he delivered his ruling. The lawsuit was dismissed. Immediately. There was no legal basis for eviction. No basis for the claims presented. No basis for continuing the action. Then he said something that nobody in the room expected, including me. He looked directly at my mother, then at me, and finally said, "It appears Ms. Rachel Morgan has demonstrated extraordinary generosity." The room went silent once more. Different this time. Not tension. Recognition. For years, people had heard one story. Now they were hearing another. And there, in open court with relatives watching and neighbors listening, the truth finally stood on its own. My mother lowered her head. And for the first time all day, she had absolutely nothing to say. The courthouse emptied slowly. People lingered in small groups near the elevators and outside the entrance. Nobody wanted to leave right away. Not after what they'd just witnessed. I gathered my papers carefully and slid them back into the folder I'd carried all morning. The same folder that had sat untouched in my closet for years. The same folder I had hoped I'd never need. My attorney zipped his briefcase and smiled. "You okay?" I thought about the question. For a long moment I wasn't sure. Relieved. Yes. Exhausted. Definitely. Happy. Not exactly. Because despite everything, this wasn't the ending I'd imagined during all those sleepless nights. There was no triumphant feeling. No dramatic victory. Just a quiet sense that something heavy had finally been set down. "I think so," I said. He nodded. "Good." Then he shook my hand and headed toward the parking garage. I remained near the courthouse steps for a few minutes. Downtown Dayton looked exactly the same as it had that morning. People walked by carrying takeout bags, traffic lights changed. A city bus rolled past. Life continued. Funny how that works. The biggest day of your life can happen while everyone else is simply running errands. I was about to leave when I heard someone call my name. "Rachel." I turned. It was Denise, my cousin, the same cousin who had spent the entire morning sitting behind my mother. She looked uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than I'd ever seen her. "Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to say no. Instead, I nodded. We walked toward a bench near Courthouse Square. She sat down first. For a few seconds, she stared at the sidewalk. Then she sighed. "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond. She continued. "I believed what everyone was saying. I appreciated the honesty. Most people would have softened it. Made excuses. Denise didn't. I thought your mother was helping you." "Most people did." She looked embarrassed. "I never asked questions." "No." She shook her head. "No, I didn't." After another awkward pause, she stood. "I just wanted to tell you that." Then she left. That conversation repeated itself several times over the next few weeks. Phone calls, emails, unexpected visits. People who suddenly discovered they hadn't known the full story. Some apologized. Some avoided details. Some pretended they always knew something wasn't right. Human nature can be funny that way. Everyone wants to stand near the truth after it's already safe. Meanwhile, my mother disappeared. Not literally, but socially. Church attendance dropped. Community events became less frequent. People talked. Of course they talked. Small-town Ohio practically runs on conversations, especially among retirees. Within days, everyone seemed to know some version of what happened, and every version became a little bigger than the last. One story claimed I'd secretly owned half of downtown Springfield. Another claimed I'd been a millionaire for years. One particularly creative rumor suggested I had hidden offshore bank accounts. That one actually made me laugh. If anyone had seen my checking account, they'd know how ridiculous that was. 3 weeks after court, I met with a real estate broker. The decision wasn't easy. I drove around for nearly an hour before the appointment, just thinking. Thinking about Grandpa, thinking about family, thinking about everything that had happened. The house had become a symbol of something unhealthy, a place built on assumptions, resentment, entitlement. I didn't want to carry that burden forever, so I made a decision. I would sell it. Not immediately, not cruelly, but eventually, my attorney helped draft a formal notice. 6 months. That was the timeline. 6 full months for my mother to make arrangements. 6 months to relocate. 6 months to figure out what came next. When she received the letter, she called me. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I was making spaghetti. The sauce was simmering. A baseball game played quietly on television. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But I did. "Hello." Silence. Then her voice. "You're really doing this?" Not hello. Not how are you. Just that. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Yes. Another pause. Then she said something that surprised me. Not because it was shocking. Because it was so predictable. "This is all your grandfather's fault." I closed my eyes. After everything. After the courtroom. After the documents. After the truth. She still couldn't accept it. Still couldn't look inward. Still couldn't ask why. Only who to blame. For a brief moment I considered arguing. Explaining. Defending myself. Then I realized something. I didn't need to. The conversation we'd been having for 40 years was finally over. "Mom, what?" "I hope you find a place you like." Silence. Then a sharp exhale. And before she could begin another accusation, I quietly ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for several seconds afterward, listening to the silence, waiting for guilt, waiting for regret. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. Not joy. Freedom. There's a difference. The house sold 7 months later. A retired couple from Cincinnati bought it. Nice people. They loved the backyard, loved the neighborhood, loved the maple tree Grandpa planted decades ago. The proceeds from the sale gave me options. For the first time in years, real options. I kept some of the money, invested some, and used a portion to create something that felt meaningful. The Walter Bennett Community Scholarship, a small annual scholarship for local students pursuing careers in healthcare support services, nursing assistants, medical technicians, caregivers, the kinds of people who spend their lives helping others without much recognition. People like Grandpa would have respected. The first award ceremony took place the following spring. Nothing fancy. Just a community center. A few folding chairs, coffee, cookies, families taking pictures. As I watched the students receive their awards, I thought about how strange life can be. The thing everyone assumed was about money never really was. Not for me. Money solved problems. But it wasn't the victory. The victory was finally accepting something I'd resisted for decades. Some people will never see you clearly, no matter how much you sacrifice, no matter how hard you work, no matter how long you wait. And once you stop chasing their approval, you discover how much energy you've been giving away. Looking back, I don't think revenge was winning in court. It wasn't exposing lies. It wasn't even proving people wrong. The real revenge was building a peaceful life without needing permission from the people who underestimated me. If you've ever spent years trying to earn love, respect, or recognition from someone who simply wouldn't give it, I hope this story reminds you that your worth doesn't depend on their opinion. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is tell the truth and let it stand on its own. And if this story resonated with you, thank you for spending this time with me.